All right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Hamilton. Delighted to have your company with me as always for this time a discussion on middle management. Stuck in the middle. Quite a challenging place to be at times, and I'm sure many of you will know exactly what I mean by that. In many ways, you're caught between two worlds. So we'll have a little in-depth look at that today, but first, as we often do, let's set the scene with an example from the real world, and this time we're going all the way back to 2008, and we're going to have a look at the financial world and see how a lady by the name of Ruth Porat navigated the many pitfalls that you can find in middle management. Here we go. In the heart of the 2008 global financial crisis, Ruth Porat found herself at the centre of a storm that was threatening to bring down the global economy. At the time, she was a senior executive at Morgan Stanley, serving as vice chairman of investment banking, a role that placed her squarely in the middle of the financial world's most intense pressure cooker. She wasn't the CEO, she didn't have the final word, but she was the one that many turned to when the stakes were highest. Her team was tasked with advising the US Treasury during the government's bailouts of institutions like AIG and Fannie Mae. The work was relentless. Markets were crashing, trust in the banking system was crumbling, and regulators needed fast answers based on solid risk modelling. Every call, every number, and every recommendation mattered. Porat had to manage upward, dealing with the Treasury officials, Morgan Stanley's leadership, and the growing demands of public scrutiny. At the time, she was responsible for a large team of bankers and analysts, many of whom were working around the clock, exhausted, and under immense stress. She became the critical link between two worlds, translating the fast-changing needs of government and senior leaders into direction that her teams could execute on, while shielding those teams from burnout and ensuring their work was accurate under pressure. Colleagues remember her as calm, focused, and incredibly clear. While others were swept up in a panic, Porat grounded herself in facts, logic, and empathy. She understood both the gravity of the moment and the emotional toll it was taking on her people. Her ability to navigate that middle space, to manage both up and down, to influence decisions without having the final say, didn't just help Morgan Stanley weather the storm. It earned her a reputation as one of the most trusted and capable financial leaders of her time. Years later, she would go on to become the CFO of Alphabet, but it was during those chaotic crisis years, not from the boardroom, but from the messy middle, that she proved her leadership under fire. And that's an interesting example from a time that no doubt would have been immensely difficult from a pressure perspective. Financial institution, global financial crisis, and I can only imagine the panic that was taking hold at that time. But the truth is, you don't have to be in a huge company like Morgan Stanley or experiencing something as severe as a global financial crisis to experience these pressures when you're caught in the middle. It is a very tough place to be because you are caught between two worlds. You've got expectations above and below. Now let's bear in mind that if you're in the C-suite, those above middle management, you're not completely foreign to those pressures, because we always have to remember that everybody has a boss. If you're in the C-suite or the executive team, you answer to the CEO, and they answer, likely, to a board of directors if you're in a big organization. So there is some element of this still at play in the most senior ranks of the organization as well. It's really only until you get onto the board of directors where you're in charge of setting strategy that you are truly at the top of the tree and you don't answer to anybody per se. But it's a little bit different in middle management. I would suggest that the pressures are a little more so because the style of work day to day is different for middle management leaders. And that's because when you're in the middle, you're faced with frontline problems. You're not far enough removed yet from frontline exposure as those sitting in the executive team are often finding themselves to be. And what that means is you'll often have your junior leaders coming to you as the escalation point for those frontline problems. So you still have to have your real-time problem-solving hat on, your operational problem-solving hat on, and depending on the industry that you're in, you could be faced with quite a chaotic set of problems day to day if you're in a fast-paced industry where problems arise often that need quick solutions. So in middle management, you still find yourself having to play a bit more of a hands-on role with respect to problems that arise on the front line, simply because you're not quite far enough removed just yet. But on the flip side, you also, if you're good at the job, take those frontline discussions and problems and observations, and you pass that experience up the chain to your senior manager, to the executive team, and act as a conduit between the front lines and the senior levels. And why do we do that? Because, and this is crucial, this is why middle management is so important. If your senior leadership team doesn't really have much of an idea what goes on the floor, if they're missing that conduit and that connection, very, very difficult for them to manage any organisational problems that arise, because they're simply not in tune with what those problems are. This is why middle management is absolutely crucial. But above that, to add another layer of complexity for our middle managers, you're also charged with understanding the strategic initiatives of the organisation that is developed at that senior executive level. And then, of course, you're briefed on it to ensure that you are aligned. But then your task is to go to your frontline team, your junior leaders, and decipher that message. And let's face it, we've all seen corporate speak before. And when you're in that middle management position and you get the briefing from the senior management team, often it requires you to break down some really broad ideas, often presented in corporate lingo, into meaningful information that your team on the floor, who have absolutely no interest in any of that stuff, you've got to break it down to them so that they're clear on a few things. Firstly, what the strategy is. And secondly, how they, in their roles, can make a difference. You have to break down those broad corporate terms and explain to your team members how it applies to them and why it's important. And here's where the coaching piece comes in. This is why middle management is such a proving ground, because you have to have the full gamut of skills. Because you can receive that information, you can decipher that information, but your job's only half done, because guess what? You've also got to make those people care. You've got to make those people on the floor, those junior leaders, those people who don't have any aspirations perhaps to climb the ladder, who aren't passionate about business and leadership and finance and running an organization well, those people who just want to do the job well, clock off at 5 o'clock and go home to their families. You've got to motivate them and coach them so that they can engage passionately in a caring manner, in an enthusiastic manner. And maybe if you're lucky, you can get them to take some pride in their work and some ownership of their work. That coaching mentality, that motivational force between the executive team and then the point where the rubber hits the road, which is our frontline teams and our junior leaders. Middle management is such a crucial part of any organisation for those reasons, and some perhaps need to be reminded of that, because it's also a dangerous place to be. Let's get on to the dangers of middle management. It can feel like you're in no man's land. What do I mean by that? Because you're earning enough dollars to make a dent in the budget. And you're often seen as a good target for cost cutting by those in the senior leadership team. You're seen as often disposable. Now, I would suggest that people making decisions of that nature without thorough analysis and understanding of what that middle management position brings to the table, I would suggest that people who are looking to cut costs by eliminating middle management without very careful analysis are committing a grave error of judgment, because it is a vital link, and without that link, well, if you're at the senior level, you better be prepared to spend a heck of a lot more time down on the floor with your frontline leaders, because that's important. And you have to fill the void that you've now created by removing that crucial link. Ignorance may be bliss, but it is not conducive to good business or good organisational management. So it's a dangerous place to be. Sometimes you encounter ignorance, sometimes you encounter poorly thought out manoeuvring by the senior leadership team, and you can find yourself the target of a cost-cutting initiative. And the other thing to bear in mind is that often when we're in middle management, we have enough seniority to be held responsible, to shoulder the blame for something that doesn't go to plan or results that are underwhelming. But we don't have enough seniority to affect change on a large scale, even if your ideas are fantastic. I'll say it again, you have enough seniority to shoulder blame and responsibility, but not enough seniority to change on a large scale. And that's a tricky position to be in, isn't it? Because now, rather than saying, hey guys, let's get together for a strategy workshop, agree on what needs to be done, and then implement it for the rest of the organisation to follow, we're in a position where we have to suggest, we have to lead people to conclusions delicately. We have to lead up the chain as well as down. We can't come across too strong or too insistent because we don't want to put noses out of joint. We don't want to hurt egos. And sometimes that can be incredibly frustrating if you think you have the answers to the problems that you're observing. So it's a tactful position. It requires patience and strategy and forethought. It is indeed a very, very interesting place to be. And in closing, I will just mention our senior leaders and those of you among us who are perhaps in those senior ranks. You have to understand the vital link that good middle management provides. And understand that their removal is something that you do at your own risk. Make sure you have a very, very good idea of the value, often unseen, that they provide. You know, one of the things I talk about a lot from a leadership perspective is that oftentimes it's difficult to quantify what good leadership actually does from a timesheet perspective. How do you timesheet the value that a fantastic leader brings to the table? They're not closing out work orders, guys. They're not addressing customer queries. They're not making sales. Yet at the same time, we all know the impact of bad leadership. And I think we could say that none of us want that in our organizations or in our teams. So with that understanding comes an acceptance that from a dollars and figures perspective, it might not be super easy to quantify the value that a great leader is providing the organization. And that's why I suggest that we proceed with real caution if we're looking to cut costs and gut those middle management ranks. Understand what they do. And also understand that it might be a little bit more than meets the eye. How do they drive motivation? How do they coach? How do they develop? You know, because often when something's running really well, it just seems normal. It's quiet. Nothing really comes up. It's relaxed. Nothing to see here. And then when that person goes and it all falls in a heap and all of a sudden all these problems that you never really knew could even be problems start popping up, you can start to realize that, okay, maybe that person had a little bit more going on and had a little bit more of a handle on things than I was aware of. So understand the lay of the land. Your good leadership, absolutely crucial, but oftentimes the value of it can be hard to pinpoint from a quantity perspective. It's hard to timesheet, it's hard to measure, but we know it has value. We know it has value. Guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me once again, and a really warm welcome to some new listeners from the United States. We have had a few new cool locations come on board. We've got New York City on the map. We've got Connecticut on the map as well as our friends in Europe. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. It's great to have you on board. Guys, what I will do is ask that if you're getting value from the show, you hit the subscribe button on whatever podcast app you consume the show on. Leave us a 5-star review. That stuff actually really does help. And make sure you check out the link to the socials at the bottom of the episode description. Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. All of those are up there for you to click and follow. And of course, if you are feeling really generous, tell a friend, tell 10 friends about the show, and let's see if we can spread the leadership standards that we're trying to promote elsewhere. It is something that I think would be really nice, just to raise the standard of leadership globally so that we at least have an understanding of what good looks like. And guys, if you ever want to get a feel, if you've ever got half an hour to kill and you want to just get a feel as to the state that we're in from a leadership perspective and how widespread this problem of putting people into leadership positions and giving them no training actually is, jump on Reddit, hit up your leadership threads, your management threads, and check out some of the questions that come through. And they are coming thick and fast. People being put into positions, leadership positions, with no training whatsoever, and then turning to Reddit for answers with respect to how they handle difficult employees or how they deal with plummeting motivation to do the job, because who would have thunk it? It turns out they absolutely hate it after a year of struggle and strife with no training. That is why this podcast exists. So it's a real pressing need. That's why I do what I do. Guys, spread the word, tell a friend, and I would be eternally grateful. But until next time, goodbye for now.